This content is brought to you in association with my buddies over at Jam Jam Cards UK. You can find the links to the eBay store and the Facebook page in the description. Hi guys, it's Joe here from Rufioh. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here, welcome aboard. You should definitely hit subscribe and the notification bell before we go any further and you realise how absolutely fucking terrible this content is. But if it's not your first time on the channel, welcome back, you absolute loser. But in either case, thank you very much for coming along. I do genuinely appreciate you being here. So for today's how to play video, we are going to be learning a little bit about Swordsoul. Now, I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce the actual OCG name because that's not going to work out good for anyone. So let's just not even go there. So if this is your first time here and watching a how to play video, the intention with these videos isn't that we're going to send you off some sort of absolute expert on the subject. We're going to give you a really solid basis and foundation to work from so you're better equipped to play with the deck or against it. We're going to assess what the deck does well. We're going to talk through the cards, and I've even got a couple of sample deck lists in here that are certainly not crafted to perfection, but may give you some ideas of what you could try out for yourself, some ideas on ratios, or something to just go out there and play test with and see how you get on. Now make no mistake, Swordsoul is a deck that people are very excited about, and Burst of Destiny will be the turning point in how the deck does in the TCG. Technically it's already here, but that's besides the point. We'll get to all that information in just a little while. Now, as a quick note before we move on to the actual content of the video, if you're watching today's video and you're feeling inspired to pick up some Yu-Gi-Oh singles, you should check out the channel sponsors Jam Jam Cards UK. There will be a link down in the description. If you go ahead and use that, you'll get a discount on their eBay store. But anyway, enough waffling on from me. Let's get stuck in to the how to play video. So Swordsoul is a deck which sort of debuted in the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG as part of Dawn of Majesty in August 2021. I say sort of because, well, there's only really one bloody card in the set, but all the same, it's there. Now, at the time of recording, we do have a bunch of stuff out on the OCG known as Xiangjian, which I don't know if I've butchered the pronunciation of. Let me formally apologise for that now. The OCG cards, however, dropped in Burst of Destiny, which at the time of recording isn't for another couple of months, more specifically later in 2021 for the TCG. The Swordsoul Archetype is made up of mostly Worm-type monsters, which is nicely spiked the prices of cards like Baxia of the Xiangjian on the secondary market. In terms of appearance, the Swordsoul monsters appear to be armoured humanoids with some dragony bits splashed in, although Xiangjian and Iris are exceptions to this, and all have fuck-off big swords which borrow elements from both Chinese and Western sword styles. On this note, the individual monsters, at least by their current names in the OCG, are named after legendary Chinese swords. And this sword business even runs into the Japanese name for the archetype, with Xiangjian referring to a profession from Imperial China which involved being a sword quality inspector. A pretty neat job, if you ask me. The deck's playstyle focuses on synchro summoning, but with most modern Yu-Gi-Oh archetypes, they don't want to be that boring. They really don't want that bog standard summoning mechanic, they love a good twist. And Swordsoul is no exception to this innovation rule. So rather than using your standard tuner-non-tuner pairing, the deck has a pretty nifty little trick which summons out level 4 tokens, which also happen to be tuner monsters. That's right, tokens that can also be used as tuners. You might already be able to see why this is a popular deck choice. This particular trick gives the deck a huge consistency boost since it doesn't need to search out token generation methods like old school cards such as Scapegoat, and nor does it need to tutor out its tuners like many other decks. Because frankly, both of these are built into the deck as part of its inherent strategic lines. This, of course, does come with a drawback, or things might have gotten a little bit silly. The effects that summon these tokens apply restrictions that prevent a player from special summoning from the extra deck, except for synchro monsters whilst the token is on the field. Now that is probably a good thing, since we can already see what kind of shenanigans might start cropping up. I'm looking at you, Halka Fibrax. The deck does also have a second line of playstyle which focuses on them banishing cards. Better keep hold of those Lanciers, even if they do yeet Tri-Brigade on the list, you'll probably still need them. Many of the Swordsoul cards need to banish worms or Swordsoul cards from the graveyard as a cost, and others banish your opponent's cards as part of their effects. The spells and traps also have effects that fire off when they're banished, with the spells messing around with monster levels and traps giving you access to the cute little tokens we talked about earlier. The deck largely relies on worms or other Swordsoul cards, so for the most part the archetype is played as pure, but we also see worm monsters such as Tenyis, Metaphys and Xiangjian being lumped in too. Now the Tenyi combination is one of the more potent of these options since they're both worm-based archetypes. It does have good synchro summoning support, and the token generated by the Swordsoul monsters can help the Tenyis get their effects. Now overall the deck has had a pretty strong showing in the OCG, being one of the more represented decks in the most recent formats and events, mostly as pure, but also with Tenyi splashed in. Now for the next part of the video, we're going to be whipping through the Swordsoul cards we know of at the time of recording. It is worth noting that there's a good chunk of cards we don't yet know the English names for, so there's likely going to be some discrepancies between what we know now and what they'll likely become once they hit the TCG. In this section I'll also be reading the effects in a somewhat shortened manner, so keep an eye on the screen for the images of the cards for a bit more clarity on exactly what they do. Yes, that's right, it would require some reading, but given you're a Yu-Gi-Oh player, let's not kid ourselves, you're probably not reading a fucking thing. So we'll start off with the monsters. Xiangjian, the Swordsoul Auspicious Beast. Before damage calculation, if your worm monster battles an opponent's extra deck monster, you can destroy that monster and this card. You can only use each of the following effects once per turn, and that's hard once per turn. Quick effects, during the main phase you contribute a monster to special summon this card from your hand. If this is sent to the graveyard as part of a synchro summon, you can target and banish a card on the field or in either player's graveyard. After that we have Long Yuan, the Swordsoul Tactician. You can discard another Swordsoul card or a worm monster to special summon this card from your hand, as well as a token. The token's level 4 Worm Tuner as discussed earlier, but if you do you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck whilst the token is there except for synchros. If this card sends to the graveyard for synchro material, you can also burn your opponent for 1200 life points. Each of these effects is a hard once per turn. After that we have Moyi, the Swordsoul Swordsmaster. If it's summoned, you can reveal a Swordsoul card or a worm in your hand and then special summon a Swordsoul token with all of the bits we talked about before. If this card sends to the graveyard as a synchro material, you can draw one card. Each of these effects is a hard once per turn. Taie, the Swordsoul Swordmaster. You can banish a Swordsoul card or one worm from your graveyard to special summon one of those funky little tokens. If it's sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can send a Swordsoul card or one worm from your deck to the graveyard. Each effect is a hard once per turn. The Iris Swordsoul. Quick effect. During the main phase, if a monster on the field has had its effects negated, you can special summon this card from your hand. If your opponent special summons a monster, you can activate one of these effects depending on where that monster was special summoned from. So if it's special summoned from their hand, you can special summon one monster from your hand. If it was special summoned from the deck, you get to draw 2 cards. And if it's special summoned from the extra deck, you can destroy one of those monsters that was special summoned from the extra deck. Each effect is a hard once per turn. And that concludes the list of main deck monsters. Now for the extra deck. Chengying, the Swordsoul Grand Duke. It's a level 10 synchro which requires a tuner and 1+ non-tuners. It gains 100 attack and defense for each banished card, and monsters your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense for each banished card. If it would be destroyed by card effects, you can banish a card from the graveyard instead. If a card or cards are banished, you can banish one card from each of your opponent's field and graveyard. This effect of the Grand Old Duke of York is a hard once per turn. Xiangjian, the Swordsoul Grand Swordmaster. It's a level 8 synchro and requires a tuner and 1+ non-tuner worm monsters. If it's synchro summoned, you can either add to your hand or banish one Swordsoul card from your deck. It also has a quick effect which allows you to banish a Swordsoul card or one worm from your hand or graveyard, then target one other effect monster on the field and negate its effects until the end of the turn. You can only use one of these effects and only once that turn. And that wraps up our list of Swordsoul monsters currently revealed and released. Next up, onto the spell and trap support. The Swordsoul Dragon Sword appears. You can search a Swordsoul monster, or if you control a synchro monster, you can add a worm monster instead. If this card is banished, you can target a Swordsoul or worm you control and then modulate its level by 1 until the end of the turn. Each effect is a hard once per turn. Xiangjian Grand Spiritual Peak. There's something about reading this that makes me think of Tiananmen Square. Makes it spring to mind, not that anything out of the ordinary has ever happened there. Target a Swordsoul monster in your graveyard or a worm if you control a synchro and then special summon it. If this card is banished, you can modulate a Swordsoul or Worm monster you control's level by 1 until the end of the turn. Each of these effectors are hard ones per turn. Swordsoul Sudden Shift. Target a Worm monster you control and 2 cards your opponent controls and destroy them. If this card is banished, you can special summon one of those snazzy little tokens with all the usual restrictions. Each effect is a hard ones per turn. Swordsoul Research. Target a face-up monster you control, banish up to 5 Swordsoul cards and or Worm monsters from your graveyard, and if you do, it gains 300 attack for each. If it's banished, you can get one of those funky little tokens we talked about earlier again, with all the usual restrictions. Each effect is a hard ones per turn. And that is a full list of our Swordsoul cards so far. It feels like an archetype that's missing 1 or 2 typical cards from modern decks, such as a negate counter trap and a field spell, so I wouldn't be shocked if we see more of those in future, although this is all speculation of course. Since the deck is relatively limited in terms of its synergy worth exploring with other archetypes and the like, we're going to be skipping over the usual section. I normally include a section which discusses the non-archetype support, but instead we'll just wrap up by sharing a couple of sample deck lists. As always with these videos, these lists are not super tried and tested, so they should be simply looked at as a basis or foundation to do your own testing and experimentation with. And that, my amigos, concludes today's video. Hopefully you've been watching this and you feel like you've actually walked away with some useful information. By virtue of the fact that you made it this far into the video, hopefully you actually have. Now, if you made it this far into the video, you're also one of the select few who actually does that. So, if you haven't already hit subscribe, you absolutely should do right now. Now, it's worth noting that this isn't the only kind of content we do on the channel. We do deck profiles, we do live matches, we do combo tutorials, we do all of the good stuff that you can expect from any of your Yu-Gi-Tubing favourites, except that my content's fucking absolute rubbish. So if you don't want to miss out on that kind of nonsense, you should absolutely be hitting that red button and the notification bell before you go any further and exit the channel in a moment. But anyway, I'm definitely waffling on because I'm a little bit fucking tired. So thank you very much for coming along. I do appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next one.